Everyone, this is George Couros, and welcome back to another highlight edition of the Innovator's Mindset podcast for the month of October 2023. I actually had to look to figure out what month it is. Time seems to go by really, really quick. And lots of great guests, lots of great ideas. And we're trying to keep these videos a little bit shorter just to get you some highlights. And I really encourage you, when you listen, if there's something that resonates, comment on the video on YouTube, or connect with us somehow, comment on Twitter, but also connect with the people that you're listening to. All their information is actually shared below, so you can connect with them, because I think it's really powerful to take some time to let people know that the things that they're sharing are resonating with you, that they're having an impact on you. Because too often what we do is we hear great ideas from people and we just assume everyone's telling them things are great, that we really appreciate their work, so we don't do it ourselves. And if everyone actually embraced that, nobody would ever hear anything good. So I encourage you to connect with the people that you hear or watch in this video, because I think there is a real power in connecting. And it's something that we want for ourselves too. No matter how many times we're acknowledged, it never hurts to hear it again, right? So just make sure you take that opportunity, because these are wonderful people and they're taking their time to share their ideas with me. And I'm very, very grateful they do that. To have a podcast that people want to come on to is something I'm really, really grateful for. So what I want to do to just kind of introduce this podcast is just share a little bit of my thinking. And here's what I'm going to share today. I recently read a line from a book called Good Boss, Bad Boss, and by Robert Sutton. And it says this: every boss ought to keep searching for things to remove and simplify, and ways to make life less frustrating and annoying. Great bosses live the motto, when in doubt, take it out. That's a quote again from Robert Sutton. And I absolutely think that quote is really, really powerful. In education, too often we talk about things like innovation and just constantly pushing the boundaries of what we can do. And what happens is we often just try to do everything, that it's impossible to do anything. And for me, when I talked about innovation and the innovator's mindset, I actually talked about it in two ways: that it can be either iteration or invention. It can be something we create that's totally new, or it can be something that we've done in the past and really kind of dig deep and rethink about how we utilize this. And if you really want to be innovative, we have to know fundamentals. We have to really know the basics, but we also have to know our people. It's like we're in this constant search of just new initiatives, new ideas, when a lot of times to do things really, really well, it's actually perfecting and honing your craft. And if you're constantly just piling initiatives onto people, they'll never actually become good at anything, and they'll become overwhelmed and burnt out. And I shared this quote actually in the Innovator's Mindset, and I shared that to create a culture where innovation flourishes, we have to realize that in many cases, we already have everything we need. We just need to figure out how to tap into it. And of course, we can always fund education better. It is very imperative that we treat the people in education better and appreciate all the work that we actually do. But it's just that focus on, we're constantly looking for the new, that we're not really appreciating what we already have. And I truly believe this, that there's so much wisdom and talent in our schools today. How we tap into it is what great leaders do. And if you constantly are adding things, you kind of forget what you already have. Just something I was thinking about. And I just wanted to lead with that. I wanted to share that idea with you, because I think, especially at this time of year, people are feeling really, really overwhelmed and underappreciated. And sometimes pulling back isn't about doing less, it's just doing things better. So I wanted to share that with you. Just a quick insight. I didn't want to take too much time away from my wonderful guests this month. So welcome back to another highlight edition of the Innovator's Mindset podcast. One of the things that I say with groups that are maybe, they're banning devices still to this day in classrooms, the worst thing you can do is just say, hey, we're going to let you have devices tomorrow, and teach the same way that you were teaching before, because now you're going to lose. But how do you get people to think differently about how they use that. And I think both of us learned that from a place of experience. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, and you said the key word, value. You
Mm,
know, I think the greatest impact a leader can have, leadership is not telling people what to do, it's taking them where they need to be.
mhm,
And nobody wants to be told what to do. I mean, you don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be told what to do. But if the conditions are created where we see the value, then change happens more through intrinsic motivation. When I think about, it wasn't just a challenge of me doing a 180 and saying no devices. Oh, now we're gonna open the floodgates and do bring your own device. But then it was, how do I get my staff on board?
mhm.
And it took time to help them see the value. So I think in leadership today, it's not about doing it all. It's about how do you help those that you serve see the value in different ideas, perspectives, strategies. I try not to say new because a lot of the strategies might be new to a leader who's implementing for the first time, but they might not be
Right.
necessarily, new. So I think what you said is that, again, how you help others see the value. But here's the thing, you as a person with a title, if you're a leader, you first have to see the value in doing things
Mm.
differently, doing things better, breaking free from the status quo or the mentality of that's the way we've always done it, or this, it's working. Why change it?
Mhm.
And that comes back to just knowing that in education, change is a ongoing process, and there's always aspects where we can grow and improve.
I'm Andrew Marotta, school leader here in Port Jervis, New York. I got to give a shout out to the Raiders. We're an hour and a half northwest of New York City. I've been a school leader here for 20 years. And George, right, we're proud of where we are. I'm so invested here. Our graduation rate used to be in the 60s, and we're in the 90s now, right at that 90 mark. And great things are happening here. So I'm honored to be here and be part of the work that's been happening. And through that journey, right, I've fallen in love with writing and presenting to other principals and helping others along the way. So it's been a great journey.
Okay, so this is the first question I'm going to ask. You're going to see if you can share the secret. I don't know if you're going to keep this to everybody. So, if you went from 60 to 90, what was it, like? What did you do? Like, what did you do that changed?
Yeah. Is this going to be the 24-hour podcast between me and you?
Right.
Yeah.
And that, that's what I was, even that, what you just said kind of stuck in my mind. Because a lot of times people want to attribute a change like that to, we did this one thing
Yeah.
and then everything changed. But probably it's a combination of multiple things. But then it's also harder to quantify what percentage of those multiple things you did led to it, right? Like I think about that all the time because it's like you don't know this one thing was the ultimate change if you're doing, especially if you're doing 4 or 5 things in a district to improve stuff. So like if you can even think of 2 or 3 things that helped you on that, because I know it'd be, probably you couldn't say all of the things, all the ways your district came together, all the ways your, teachers really kind of implemented things and, did them really well. So what would you kind of say stuck out to you?
Well, and I love listening to your work, George, and you're so well read and your memory of remembering what people said what. So in your style, I'm going to tell a little story. Malcolm Gladwell did a TED talk called Choice, Happiness, and Spaghetti Sauce, right? And in the talk, Howard Moskowitz wanted to come up with the best spaghetti sauce for the company, right? And he did all this work and all this research. And in the talk, Malcolm Gladwell shares that there is no perfect spaghetti sauce.
Right.
It's variety, right? Some people like chunky, some people like spicy, some people like marinara, right? And it's the same in schools. There's no one perfect thing. There's no one perfect. And it's, like you just said, all of those good things moving forward together. The first thing, the most important, is that we cleaned up the place, George. They used to allow smoking. There was smoking everywhere. The bathrooms were smoke. Things were dirty. They were dingy. Think about the world we live in today. You go to an Airbnb or you go to a restaurant. If the front foyer is dirty, people are going to turn around. People are going to, so we really cleaned up the place, our hallways. Used the word relentless before. If I saw graffiti, I was wiping it off, but my director of buildings and grounds was getting mad at me that I led the district in work orders because I wasn't tolerating, that lesser thing. And then really caring, right? What is an organic way so the kids know that we care?
And it's not about anyone in particular, but sometimes I feel in the superintendency position, we can lose focus on the teaching and learning. And so we're saying stuff, but we don't really understand what goes on in the classrooms every single day. So how have you found that balance? Because I noticed you did that very, very well, to really kind of understand and empathize and be able to work with your teachers. And when I say empathize, it doesn't actually mean that every facet of their job in the moment to the day, but you still put them in a position where they can be successful. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah. So, and even beyond teachers and teaching and learning, I still think the number one priority is the student. So no matter what role I'm in, I don't want to be disconnected from kids, right? So every week I make it a priority to get in classrooms. So far this year, I'm at 182 classroom visits. I've got a chart on my board here in my office, and I make little notations, what buildings, what classrooms I go into. And my goal this year is 800 classroom visits. I want to get into classrooms because I don't feel like I can make any decision that's good for kids if I don't know how kids are learning in the classrooms. So I go in, and I stay in my lane. I don't do walkthroughs. That's not my lane. I just want to walk in and see what's happening. I'm not a curriculum director anymore. I'm not a principal. That's not what I'm in the room. I'm just in the room to get the vibe, to see if the level of rigor is where I truly believe it needs to be for all kids. And also that opens the door for me to have conversations with teachers, not about teaching at all. It's how you doing today? Oh my gosh, I love what I just saw. It is nothing that I'm gonna, write up an evaluation. It's just not what I do. But then at the end of the week, I put out what's called a superintendent shout out, and I share every good teaching and learning opportunity that I saw for the week. And that way, someone at our high school can see what's going on. They've got a lens to what's happening in kindergarten. So there's no more of that, well, they never learned that there, or they, yes, kids are learning all across the district, and I'm going to stay connected with that. I just have made that my priority. And then I also don't ignore what's happening politically as a superintendent. I can't. So if reading is what's on the mind of every Kansas legislature, then I need to make sure as a superintendent that my curriculum folks have what they need to ensure that we're on track with what the state wants for those initiatives. So it's truly finding a balance, but also prioritizing. I mean, I set myself up I try to do an hour a day in a building. That's my goal.
So we were talking about running before, and how you and I both track what we're gonna do every day. I'm like, oh, you got that from running. You're
for sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. That's because that's how I train. I make sure I write everything doon. And so that's the first time I'm like, oh, she got that from running. So
for sure.
That's awesome. The one of the things I've been saying forever is, this is what I appreciate about you, because I didn't know your answer, but I knew it. Do you know what I mean? I knew that's what you'd say, is that don't make decisions for classroom. If you make decisions for classrooms, you have to be in the classrooms. Right. And that is something really, really important to me. And one of the conversations I've had with people over the years, you'll see someone who has really great leadership skills and would be a fantastic administrator, whether it's a principal, superintendent, whatever. And I'll say hey, have you thought about this direction? And one of the things they say, and I hear it all the time, is, well, I don't want to do that stuff. I really like being around kids. I'm like, you can be around kids. That's where are you getting the idea that you can't be around kids? Because a lot of times they see kind of what I was talking about. It's all about the politics. It's not about actually being in the classrooms. And there's a joke I make, and I'm sure you'll understand it, but it doesn't seem like you do it, about the superintendent entourage, where we bring in the board members and we all crouch down and all that stuff. And people, it feels very fake, and people act a certain way because they think I'm on watch, for these few minutes that everyone's pretending that they really know what's going on in the classrooms. And I can really tell a lot about a superintendent, a principal, is when they walk into the classroom, do people change their attitude?
Right.
And if you're in it all the time, I guarantee you when you started doing that, people are probably like terrified,
Yes.
right? But then now it's just like, oh yeah, Renee's.
Yeah.
How much of that is like really kind of just understanding the kids actually doesn't happen in the paperwork? Because I think sometimes we do all of this stuff, write all of this stuff, but sometimes it's just a conversation that it's really hard to document, but tells us a lot about the kids. Like, how do you kind of balance that out? Because there is a frustration that a lot of teachers didn't get into the role to do tons of documentation, right? So how do you kind of dig into that? Because I know that's a frustration a lot of people have.
Sure. So I can kind of answer from two ways. I know as a teacher, looking over my IEPs every year and understanding the modifications and the goals could be overwhelming.
Yeah.
So just in terms of students being successful, like I had so many kids in class that their IEP wasn't reflective of who they are as a person. And we talked before about a teacher that influenced me. And one of the things that I would try to do is to really develop that connection, understand that school may not be for this kid long term. So what is, right? Big part of what we do with secondary students, as a secondary teacher, is develop transition plans to talk about how we get a student from point A to point B after high school. And that's really where I would focus my attention, is how are we going to move this child towards their goals? Now you have to focus on the goals that are laid out in the IEP that are curricular. I mean, you can get into, I don't disparage parents for exercising their due process rights. In very many ways, it's why we have the special education programs we do now. But if you don't follow the IEP, you get into that situation. As an administrator, though, when you talk about data informed, a lot of times for us, it's leverage. Like we have a disproportionality issue in Edison, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it has a lot to do with how the number is calculated. But one thing that you can't argue with is that our students our classified students don't demonstrate the same level of proficiency in reading. Okay, that's clear.
Right.
So what can we do about that? And when I start to advocate for programs or certifications or moving our staff towards, in this case, like kind of the gold standard being like Orton certification for all our special ed staff, well, that's costly. But it's really clear in what's coming out of these assessments. So there's kind of two ways to look at it, right? As a teacher, yeah, there's stuff you have to get through, but at the center of that is a human being. For me, as a secondary teacher, the focus, what's this child's long-term goal? And then as an administrator, it's really more about, okay, what can we do from a more global programmatic perspective to actually use those data and do something positive for the overall student body of kids.
Yeah. And there's something you said there that kind of sparked a thought that I've been having lately. And this is going to maybe, get me in trouble saying this. I really struggle. It just irks me. I shouldn't say I hate it, but sometimes I would say that, is when I hear teachers referring to kids as scholars, right?
Okay.
And the reason I struggle with that is because scholars is a very academic term. It's about academics. It's about going to college. Like, it just feels that way. And it there's a little bit of a context that basically, if school is not for you, somehow you're a failure. That's what I struggle with, right? In the sense that, are we trying to get every kid to be the same kid by the time they leave school? Or are we trying to ensure that every kid knows what their strengths are, what their gifts are, what they're really good at, and that it leads to different things? And I think that, to me, like, that was something that kind of stuck out to me. What you said about that is that, maybe school is not for some kids. I'm not talking specifically in the inclusion area or the special education area. I'm talking about any kid in any program, but it's like, somehow if you're not a school kid, if you're not a scholar, somehow you're a failure. And that I really struggle with, is that it's like you're saying, like, hey, our kids have different gifts, but you all got to kind of be academic and everything's about academics. And I make a distinction between, I say sometimes there's a huge difference between the idea of our smartest kids and our top academic students, because some of our smartest kids are terrible academically. but they have gifts that we're not appreciating because they don't fit into the little bubbles that we have in school that we say are important. The balance that I see sometimes, and I've shared this often, is that if you push people too hard, they actually will crumble. But if you show too much support without that push, people don't think it's actually what you're doing is that important. So you got to kind of find that balance. That I've seen a lot of educators over the years leave teaching because they felt they weren't growing under their current leadership. And when we actually try to, and this is a problem that a lot of teachers talk about, and I think it's really powerful, is they feel so micromanaged. And I actually would say, if I kind of fell in the balance, is that I didn't maybe, I don't know if I'd say didn't support as much as I should have when I was a principal. I think part of it too is, you always kind of look back on your career, because I didn't want to micromanage my people. And part of it was because I didn't want to be micromanaged as an educator, as a teacher. So I always wanted to think about what's the principal I wanted when I was a teacher, and how am I being that person? But the weird thing is, micromanaging takes a lot of time. That if you're trying to control everything, you tend to not be able to do other things. You not really grow. And so kind of putting people in a position where they know they have autonomy, but you're also there to help them grow, to become better. And that Lasorda quote, and I'll share it again, I believe that managing is like holding a dove in your hand. If you hold it too tightly, you kill it. But if you hold it too loosely, you lose it. I think that's a really powerful quote, and just a great summary of leadership. And this beautifully lands in to the something professional part of this podcast. And I've kind of mentioned it here and there, but really haven't made a formal announcement. But right now, myself and Allison Apsey, and if you don't know Allison Apsey, I really think you should follow her. She's absolutely amazing. Brilliant leader, brilliant educator, and an absolutely amazing writer. I've known her for years. Her and I met at a Michigan elementary school principal conference that I was so blessed to be able to keynote several years ago. And her and I just had great conversations. We've stayed connected ever since. And she'll tell you that she started blogging after that conference, after seeing me. And so it's really, really cool, because her and I are actually writing a book together. And I'll say, I say that in quotations, because there's more to just her and I writing this book. And it's simply called What Makes a Great Principal. And I think Alice and I, kind of when we decided to write this book, this has kind of been a couple years in the making. And I really didn't have a vision of what this book could look like until I let it sit for a little while. And some of the advice I give to writers, as I work with them often, is don't force a book. Let it come to you. Let it happen. And basically, I read her book called Leading the Whole Teacher, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I saw elements of what makes a great principal and what that could look like in how she wrote Leading the Whole Teacher. And so her and I are working on this, and we have identified 5 domains of basically what great principals do. And we base this on, research that we've done on this topic, obviously, but also looking at what organizations kind of have shared and kind of synthesizing those ideas. And I really wanted to write this book, not because I ever thought I was a great principal, but because I knew I had a really great principal. And if I didn't have that great principal, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I'd probably be in a different profession. And I really didn't know what a great principal was until I had one. And so we share about this, but here's what's really unique about the book. We do get insights from either current or former principals talking about those domains and really what they learned. And how they actually shared it, how they implemented those ideas. But here's what's really unique about the book. One of the questions I've been asking forever to teachers is, would you want to be a student in your own classroom? And the reality of this is, when you ask that question, you're really trying to understand who are the people you serve, what's their experience in the places that you actually create, and moving backward from there. And asking that question, I think, is a really important one. But the other question, I kind of mentioned it earlier, is would I want to be a staff member on a school that I was principal? too often when I talk to people that, maybe are considering going into admin, becoming administrators, they'll say to me, I don't want to do those things that my principal does. And I'm like, well, when you're the principal, you kind of do what you want. And I know people feel that's not totally true. The reality of really great principals is that if you are good with communication, if you're good with your community, you have a lot of flexibility, right? If you're getting phone calls to the superintendent's office all the time, things totally change. But there's a lot of opportunity to create what you wanted as a teacher when you became a principal. And here's why this book is going to be unique. We actually have teachers or former teachers, even a student or two, who are writing stories about great principals they've had and how they actually showed those domains that Allison and I have focused on, and really what some of the strategies that their principals use that brought out the best in them. And I think that's what's unique. A lot of times when you read a book, it's coming from like a top-down perspective. People that, were superintendents telling principals how they should be because they've worked with so many principals. But there's more teachers have worked with principals than anybody. And the reality of this is we wanted to get their perspective and hear their stories and share that. And so a lot of times I hear principals saying, it's really important that we consider the people that we're serving. And so that's why we're actually having this book as a collaboration between myself, Allison, and some really great principals, but most importantly, from the teachers and the students they've served. And so hearing their perspective. And so if you are either a principal, an aspiring administrator, or you work with principals, I think it's going to really be a great book. And Allison is just an amazing writer. I feel so blessed to be working with her on this. And the contributors we have, and we'll be announcing that pretty soon, are incredible. And so that's the Something Professional part of this podcast.